In a small room with yellow flowered wallpaper, two people were standing. One was a short, older woman with gray hair and a tough face. She had a long, pointy nose and thin, dry lips. A heavy necklace bounced on her chest every time she opened her mouth to speak. Her voice was sharp and cold. "Vova, do you understand that we can't keep living like this?" the woman said, lifting her chin. "She's in our way." The man looked at his mother with a mix of guilt and fear. His face was soft and full of sadness. He didn't know where to look. His hands just hung at his sides. "She's my wife, Mom. You just don't understand," he said quietly. His mother threw up her hands. "Oh, please. If she really meant something to you, you wouldn't let her drag us all down. I'm not going to take care of her anymore. She's like a vegetable. Didn't you hear what the doctor said? She won't live more than a year. What's the point of doing anything for her?" She continued, "I think she'll be better at her grandmother's old house. Maybe being back in her childhood home will help her remember something." Vladimir nodded slowly, uncertain. "Besides," his mother added, lowering her voice, "we'll get a decent inheritance after she dies. That money could really help us." Vladimir sighed and looked at his mother. The next day, all of Nadezhda's things were packed. Her mother-in-law, Antonina Ignatievna, had put the suitcases in the hallway, smiling as she looked at her confused daughter-in-law. Nadezhda was a small, sweet-looking woman with light hair. She was sitting in a wheelchair. She was only 27 when she had a stroke, and since then, she had become fully disabled. She couldn't move or speak. She just sat in silence all day. Antonina looked after her while Vladimir was at work at an insurance company. Sometimes it seemed like Vladimir stayed late at the office on purpose to avoid coming home, to avoid the helpless woman who couldn't even go to the bathroom by herself. Antonina had never liked her daughter-in-law. She thought Nadezhda was too ambitious and too focused on her career. She believed a woman should stay home and support her husband, not chase promotions or business goals. Before the stroke, Nadezhda had worked as an assistant to a CEO and hoped to one day start her own company. But she had no money and no time. The stroke shattered all of that and also wiped out any sympathy Antonina might have had for her. If before she just nagged, now she screamed. She often ignored Nadezhda's medicine or forgot to feed her. The only thing that made Antonina happy was that Nadezhda couldn't talk back anymore. She couldn't interrupt Antonina while she reread her old theater scripts from her acting days. While Vladimir was loading heavy bags into the car, Nadezhda sat by the door, watching with fear in her eyes. Her eyes were red and full of tears. She gave a faint smile. Antonina said with fake sweetness, "Your doctor said you have a weak heart. You won't last long. But the air in the village is fresh. Maybe you'll live a little longer. That old house, didn't you always want to go back?" Nadezhda had so many thoughts in her head, but no way to say them. Her hands were limp in her lap. If she could, she would have grabbed her pants and screamed everything she felt about this bitter old woman. "Vovachka, dear, what's taking so long?" Antonina called out. The man came up the stairs, sweating and breathing hard. "The elevator's broken," he panted. "I had to carry everything from the 20th floor." Antonina threw her hands in the air and shook her head at her daughter-in-law. "I told you we should have hired a mover." "Mom, you know we can't afford that," Vladimir said. "Back in my day, I performed in theaters to full crowds every night," Antonina said dreamily. "Mashenka used to come see me after his lectures. Did I ever think I'd end up changing diapers?" She glanced again at her silent daughter-in-law and said nothing more. Out on the landing, their neighbor Ninotchka passed by. "Good afternoon," she said. Antonina smiled widely. "Hello, Verachka. Yes, we're going somewhere. We're taking you to a care home for a while," Vera Semyonovna said gently. "It's just for some rehab. The doctor said it might help you." Nadezhda blinked slowly. It must be expensive, she thought. Vera Semyonovna shook her head and sighed. "Yes, it is very expensive, but we'll just have to tighten our belts. We can't leave our dear daughter-in-law without proper care. You've done so much for us." After a few more kind words, she went back into her apartment. As soon as her door closed, The kind smile vanished from Antonina Ignatievna's face. She turned to her son with a frown. "Let's hurry up before the whole building finds out what we're doing," she said quickly. "I told you we should do this early in the morning." Vladimir picked up the suitcase and groaned. "Early in the morning? It's freezing out." "It's autumn now. Do you want me to freeze my fingers off?" he muttered. Without waiting for a reply, he walked out, leaving his annoyed mother behind. Vladimir was his parents' only child, born when they were already older. Antonina and her husband, Mikhail Yefimovich, had once had successful careers. She was a theater actress, and he was a law professor. But they put their lives aside to raise their son. The result of all that overprotection? Vladimir, almost 40 years old, still living with his mom, working a low-paying job where his boss mocked him and co-workers didn't respect him. About 40 minutes later, Vladimir had packed everything, including his wife. He folded up Nadezhda's wheelchair and gently placed her in the back seat. She was breathing heavily, tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked at her husband with a mix of confusion and tiny, desperate hope. "Nadia, please calm down," Vladimir whispered, adjusting his seatbelt. "A neighbor will be looking after you there. We'll pay her from your money." That last part didn't sound great, even to him. He shrugged. "You know how it is. We're kind of tight on money right now, but it'll be better for you there." Nadezhda stared at her husband, unblinking. She searched his pale face for even a little bit of pity. Some hint that he didn't want to do this. But all she saw was avoidance. He kept looking around, trying to act like this was all normal. Outside, people walked by. No one stopped to question the man putting a crying, helpless girl into a car. At exactly 12 o'clock, the car pulled away from Vladimir's building. Antonina waved casually, then returned to her apartment, sat down with an old playbook, and imagined herself back on stage, receiving thunderous applause. Vladimir sighed and pressed on the gas. He tried not to glance in the rearview mirror, where Nadezhda sat with red, swollen eyes, staring silently ahead. "Nadia," he said, "I hope you understand. I didn't have a choice." He could almost swear she raised one eyebrow in sarcasm, but when he looked again, her face was blank and stone cold. "My mom's just trying to help us," he added, forcing the words out. "She's right. I can't take care of you all the time. I have a job. She's not young anymore either. It'll be better for you there. You'll have a nurse, and you'll be back at your grandmother's house. You always talked about it with warmth." He stopped talking and turned away from her stare, but he could still feel it burning through his back, through his thin jacket, pressing against his lungs and making him breathe faster. The road ahead was long. The village where Nadezhda would now live was remote and nearly empty. There were only a couple of streets, a few houses, one small store in the center, and an old medical clinic that had closed years ago. There was no one working in the area anymore. A dark blue car pulled up with a loud engine near a small, rundown house. The garden was wild and overgrown. The fence was tilted, almost falling, but the house itself didn't look too bad from the outside. Huge old trees stood around the yard, and the grass was so tall in some spots it reached over the fence. In front of the window, there was an old bench resting on two stumps, and someone was lying on it. While Vladimir pulled his wife out of the car and unfolded her wheelchair, Nadezhda stared at the figure by the bench. It was the house of her late grandmother, but she couldn't tell who the person lying there was. "Galina!" Vladimir shouted. The person groaned and sat up. A short woman with messy short hair stood and slowly stumbled toward the gate. Her face was wrinkled and saggy. Her lips were cracked, and she had an old bruise under one eye. Her clothes made no sense. A bright yellow t-shirt with English words, green shorts even though it was cold, and pink shoes with rhinestones that were falling apart. "Vivi Vladimir Mihailovich," the woman stuttered. "You came early." Vladimir frowned and turned to his wife. "Nadia, this is your nurse, meet Galina. She's going to take care of you now." Galina gave a little nod and swayed in place. If Nadezhda could roll her eyes, she definitely would have. The whole situation felt like a sick joke and terrifying at the same time. Vladimir carried all the suitcases inside himself. Then he handed Galina a thin envelope, probably with a small amount of money. but judging by how she looked, it was enough for her. Vladimir paused in front of Nadezhda in her wheelchair and sighed. Nadia, why do you look so unhappy? I'm sure, deep down, you're smiling. This is your childhood home, he said, glancing around at the wild yard and the broken gate that fell apart when he touched it. Fresh air, constant care. What else do you need to be happy? Nadezhda could think of a million better answers, but as always, she stayed silent, just glaring at him. Each look said more than any words ever could. Vladimir understood. Somewhere deep inside, a small pang of guilt twisted in his chest. But then he remembered what his mother said and the numbers in his bank account. The guilt disappeared. He got back in the car, waved awkwardly at his wife through the window. Galina walked up and waved too. Don't worry, Vladimir Mihailovich. Everything will be fine, she said. Vladimir forced a smile, then drove away, leaving Nadezhda alone with a crumbling house, an overgrown yard, and an alcoholic woman who smelled of booze and everything else you could imagine in a forgotten village. A year later. Vova, are you serious? You haven't checked on your wife in a year? Antonina Ignatievna stared at the calendar, horrified. Are you completely stupid? What kind of man did I raise? She looked at him sharply. How do you even know she's still alive? What if she died months ago? Or worse, what if she didn't? Vladimir sat up from the couch, annoyed. He had just gotten back from work and was watching a football game. Without thinking, he had let it slip that he'd never visited Nadezhda since dropping her off. I talk to Galina every week, he said. She always says everything is fine. I send money every few months. Calm down. Antonina let out a cold laugh and marched over to the sofa. She grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. When I talk to you, she said dramatically, you look at me. Only at me. She tossed her head, careful not to mess up her high, fancy hairstyle. Galina, she snapped. That drunk woman you left in charge of your wife. Do you even know if she's taking care of her? Or is she spending all the money on booze? What if she hasn't seen Nadia in months, while you're lying here watching TV? Vladimir stared blankly at the wall and sighed. You want me to go tomorrow? Fine. I'll waste my only day off driving to that remote village just to visit my half-dead wife. Happy now, Mom? You care about me so much, Vladimir said. Antonina Ignatievna snorted loudly. Not at all. She tossed the TV remote at her son and stormed out of the room, mumbling under her breath everything she really thought about him. The next morning, Vladimir packed a small bag, took an envelope of money, and got into his car. He looked at the clock. It was just 8 a.m. He wished he was still in bed, but instead, he was driving to some village he barely remembered, and worse, he wasn't even sure why he had ignored his mother's warnings for so long. But he'd grown up doing exactly what she told him, always. The drive was long. Of course, the radio had stopped working, so he sat in silence, interrupted only by the occasional honking and shouting from impatient drivers. The whole morning felt miserable. A big black car suddenly flew past him from the opposite direction, clearly going fast and familiar with the area. A younger man was driving. He slammed on the brakes when he saw Vladimir's slow-moving car. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you, the guy said through the window. Vladimir waved a tired hand. He didn't feel like arguing. He vaguely remembered the way to the house where Nadezhda was staying. He had only been to the village 3 times, once to drop her off, once to meet Galina in the district center, and the first time, years ago, when they were dating, and Nadezhda had shown him her childhood home. She had told him it used to belong to her mother and grandmother. Now, Vladimir's dark blue car pulled up near the same house. There was a nearly new fence, and the grass had been cut, but it had clearly grown tall again, like no one had touched it for weeks. The whole place looked abandoned. Vladimir frowned and got out. He opened the gate slowly and called out, Nadezhda? Galina? Silence. He tried to go inside, but the front door had a giant padlock on it. He pulled the door, nothing. Locked tight. He took out his phone and tried calling Galina, but she didn't pick up. Tired and annoyed, Vladimir rubbed his forehead and looked around. Galina's house should have been nearby. He had thought it was convenient at the time. But now, his mother's warnings didn't seem so foolish. He had trusted Galina, even though she never really gave off a trustworthy vibe. Leaving Nadezhda's house, he walked along the village road, looking for Galina's place. It looked even worse, run down, filthy, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. He stepped inside and immediately had to hold his nose. The stench was unbearable. He ran through the house quickly, no sign of Nadezhda, then rushed back outside, gasping for air. Just then, he saw a plump woman walking past with 2 buckets. He ran to her. "Excuse me, do you know where Nadezhda is?" he asked. The woman frowned. "She lived in that house, right?" she said, pointing toward Galina's place. "You mean the drunk Gaka that used to be there?" Vladimir nodded. "Well, she's probably at Semenovika's now, down at the end of the village. She stays with him, buys moonshine from him." "Who are you to her?" the woman asked. "That doesn't matter," Vladimir said. "Just show me where he lives." The woman pointed toward a beat-up house at the end of the road. The local moonshiner's place. Sure enough, Galina was there. She sat at a large wooden table, singing loudly and sipping a yellow drink that stank up the whole room. Vladimir stormed in, grabbed her by the arms, and dragged her outside. "Where is Nadezhda?" he shouted. Galina blinked, confused and clearly drunk. "Who's yelling?" she said, slurring her words. "My wife." "Where is she, you useless drunk?" "She lives not far from here," Galina said with a crooked grin, raising her shaky hand. "And what are you going to do to me for this, huh?" Vladimir frowned angrily. Without saying a word, he pulled out his wallet, took out a few bills, and handed them to her. Galina snatched the money, quickly counted it, and gave a satisfied nod. Then she slipped out of his grip and ran back into Semenovika's house. When she came out again, she didn't have the money, but she was carrying a large bottle filled with some cloudy yellow drink. "Let's go," she said, waving him forward and wobbling as she walked, trying not to fall. Vladimir followed her as she led him down a quiet street. They walked for what felt like forever. He started to think she was messing with him on purpose and almost yelled at her. But then, in the distance, he saw the roof of a house. As they got closer, Vladimir's eyes widened. The house was huge, way bigger than anything else in the village. 3 full stories, a balcony, a big garden in the back, and even several cars and farming machines parked nearby. Galina stopped a few steps away from the tall iron gate and pointed straight ahead. "There," she said, nodding so hard her whole head bobbed. Then she turned around and walked off without saying another word. Vladimir was too shocked to reply. He stood there for a moment, staring at the house, then rang the small bell on the gate. A cheerful voice came from the speaker. "Why are you so early?" Vladimir froze. The voice was soft, familiar. "Nadia?" he asked quietly. There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice took a deep breath. "Volodya, come in." The gate opened automatically. In front of Vladimir stretched a stone path, lined with blooming flowers on both sides. He stepped carefully along the path. At the front step stood a petite blonde woman in a beige outfit with a shawl draped over her shoulders. She looked down at him with a calm, unreadable expression, like her face was wearing a mask. "I thought you'd never come," she said with a faint smile. "But since you're here, come in." Vladimir followed her, completely speechless. Inside, the house was simple, but beautifully decorated. Soft colors, tasteful paintings, cozy carpets. It felt warm, welcoming, and nothing like what he had expected. She led him past a small office, where a desk was covered with paperwork and a computer. "Don't look in there," Nadezhda said with a chuckle. "It's a mess. I need to get things organized." Vladimir was completely confused. He looked at his wife, really looked, and couldn't believe his eyes. She looked healthier than she had even before her stroke. Her pale face now had a soft, rosy glow. Her lips were red and full of life. Her eyes were bright, lightly lined, but elegant, nothing overdone. It was like he was seeing her for the first time. She led him into a large living room filled with comfortable chairs and sofas. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make tea, and then we'll talk." Nadezhda headed to the kitchen. Vladimir slowly sat down, still stunned. He looked around the room. The clean carpets, the paintings, the fresh flowers. Everything looked like a dream. He even pinched himself just to make sure it was real. He had come expecting to see a sick woman in a wheelchair, broken and helpless. But instead, in front of him stood a woman more beautiful than he had ever seen in his life. Nadezhda came back a few minutes later with a big tray. On it were several cups of tea. She handed one to her husband and took one for herself. Carefully, she sat down across from him. "You didn't expect this, did you?" she asked quietly. Vladimir shook his head. "I also didn't expect my loving husband to send me off to die just to get some money." "I thought," he began, but she cut him off. "Keep your excuses," Nadezhda said coldly. "I know everything, dear. You're terrible at hiding the truth. This was all about my inheritance." She paused for a moment, then continued. "When I got the will from my grandmother in Germany, I was so happy. I imagined the life we'd finally have together. But then, I saw something that made me change my mind." "What was it?" Vladimir asked, holding the hot cup of tea like he didn't even feel the heat. He stared into her face, looking for something, anything, to help him understand what was happening. "Remember my friend Tanya?" Nadezhda asked. "We used to work together." Vladimir nodded. "She's the one who convinced me to change my life about a year and a half ago." Back then, tall and confident Tatyana was sitting across from Nadezhda in a small restaurant. Their boss had sent them there for a business meeting, which had just ended. Dinner was paid for, so they decided to enjoy it. Nadezhda smiled as she made herself more comfortable across from her friend. Tatyana was older than Nadezhda by a few years and worked as a department head. She always wore sharp business suits and had strong opinions, especially when it came to money. Nadezhda pulled a small purse from her handbag, took out an envelope, and handed it to her. "Take a look." "What do you think?" she asked. Tatyana opened the envelope and read the letter inside. It was from Germany. "Who's Anna Reuter?" she asked. "My grandmother," Nadezhda replied. "On my dad's side. She married a German when my dad was about 6 or 7, and they moved there. Later, Dad came back to Russia and met my mom. The last time I saw Grandma was at my dad's funeral. She wanted me to go live with her." "And why didn't you?" Tatyana asked, surprised. "I couldn't leave Volodya," Nadezhda said. "His mom works here, and I never thought about living abroad." Tatyana gave her a confused look. "You're hopeless. You gave up a good life in Germany for a man?" Nadezhda rolled her eyes. She already knew what Tatyana thought about her husband and didn't want to argue. Tatyana was always very blunt, which helped her career, but it also meant she didn't have many close friends. "Your Volodya would probably sell his own mother for money," Tatyana said. "Do you even know how much your grandmother left you?" "There was a letter attached," Nadezhda replied. "She said I'm her last living relative. Part of the inheritance goes to her husband's children, and the rest to me." From the letter, it sounds like a lot, plus a small share of the estate in Germany. "Do you need to go there to get it?" Tatyana asked. "No," Nadezhda said. "There are instructions. I can accept the inheritance while staying in Russia. The notary will come here." Just then, the waiter arrived and brought their food, salads, and a glass of wine. "I bet Volodya will be thrilled," Tatyana said. "He's always dreaming about money and starting his own business." "You used to dream about that too," she added, waving her fork. "But unlike him, you actually have a chance to do it." "Don't talk like that about Volodya," Nadezhda replied. "He's a good man, just unlucky." Tatyana laughed loudly. "Yeah, and his biggest stroke of bad luck was his mom. Not a mother-in-law, a total witch. I still don't get why you live with her when you could move out." Nadezhda shrugged. "Ignatyevna can't live alone. She's not used to it. And honestly, it's not that hard for me to manage." Tatyana looked annoyed, took a sip of wine, and said, "Well, here's my advice. Don't tell anyone about the inheritance. They'll either kill you for it or start sucking up to you just to take every last cent." At that, Nadezhda slammed her palm on the table and gave her friend a sharp, warning look. "Volodya and I love each other. Nothing like that will happen. Nadezhda said. You're overreacting. You think too badly of my family. But the conversation didn't lead anywhere. That same evening, Nadezhda came home and told her family about the inheritance. She even showed them the envelope. She had never seen them that happy before. Nina Ignatyevna opened a bottle of expensive wine, and even Vladimir, who was usually very careful with money, ordered food for everyone to celebrate. Nadezhda felt like her life was finally improving. A few weeks later, Nadezhda was walking down the street, smiling at everything. Life at home had gotten better. Nina Ignatyevna stopped picking on her, and Vladimir started coming home earlier and spending more time with her. Nadezhda truly believed her life was changing for the better, finally. She stopped in front of a men's clothing store. She wanted to buy her husband a new tie as a surprise, since all his old ones looked worn out. As she stood looking at the shop window, she suddenly saw Vladimir across the street. She was about to call out to him. But then, a young woman walked up to him. The woman hugged him and kissed him. Nadezhda felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She stumbled and leaned on the window to keep from falling. She couldn't believe her eyes.
She didn't say anything.
She just went home and went straight to bed, still trying to understand what she had seen. The next morning, she took a day off work and went to a local detective agency. A small, thin man in glasses was sitting at a tiny desk, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee. Nadezhda sat down and told him the whole story. What exactly do you want to know? He asked. I want to know everything, she said. How they met, how long they've been seeing each other, where they go, what they say. Everything. The man whistled quietly, clearly surprised by how determined she was, but he stayed quiet. He didn't want to lose a client. For a whole week, Nadezhda felt like she was living in a fog. She didn't want to tell Tatiana, not because she didn't believe her, but because she knew Tatiana would say, I told you so. And she was right. Tatiana had seen through Vladimir from the beginning. She didn't even want to be a witness at their wedding. That had really hurt Nadezhda, though they made up later. But deep down, she still felt bad. Only now, Nadezhda understood. Tatiana wasn't being harsh. She was just trying to protect her. 1 week later, Nadezhda was sitting alone in a small coffee shop, drinking cold coffee and thinking. Her thoughts were a mess. Nothing made sense. She had always done everything for her husband and his mother. She gave up her own dreams. She even let go of her pride. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was the detective. He asked her to come right away. Nadezhda quickly left money on the table, grabbed her bag, and rushed to the agency. Luckily, the agency wasn't far. Nadezhda rushed inside and sat down in front of the same man, who was once again sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. He looked up, adjusted his glasses, and said, You know you're lucky. Your husband's mistress is quite the talker. Nadezhda raised her eyebrows but didn't really want to hear more. Still, the man nodded and went on. I had to follow her for almost a week and ask around, but I got everything. Her name is Lilia Sergeyevna Shabanova. She's 22 years old, just graduated from a teaching university. They met a few months ago, probably on the street. Thanks for the info, Nadezhda said. But do you have any real proof? Like a video or a recording? Grinning, the detective pulled open a desk drawer and took out a big, old-fashioned tape recorder. Nadezhda was surprised. She hadn't seen one of those since she was a kid. She didn't even know they still existed. He pressed play, and the device made a crackling sound before a loud voice came through. Vovachka, is this for me? Oh my God, it's so pretty. And probably expensive. For you, I don't mind spending anything, came Vladimir's voice, full of pride. I'll open my own business soon, he continued. Then I'll spoil you with gifts every day. The girl laughed. Didn't you say you didn't have money to start a business? There was a pause. Nadezhda couldn't hear any sound, but she could imagine Vladimir smiling. My wife has money. She just got an inheritance from her grandma, he said casually. We'll use her money to start the business. And then you'll leave her? The girl asked softly. As soon as I don't need her anymore, Vladimir replied without hesitation. The recording continued, but Nadezhda stopped listening. She just sat there, straight-backed, staring into the distance. Her mind drifted to the past, when she first met Vladimir. How happy she had been when he proposed. She was 11 years younger than him, just out of university, with a degree in economics. He had taken her to cozy cafes, walked with her under the stars, and bought theater and concert tickets. His mother, Nina Ignatievna, had seemed kind and welcoming, especially to Nadezhda, who had recently lost her own mom. She fell in love with the idea of a smart, caring family, and she didn't care that Vladimir was shy and poor. Tatiana, her best friend, had warned her not to rush, but Nadezhda hadn't listened. She had been swept up in the romance. She remembered choosing a wedding suit for Volodya, sorting through gifts after the wedding, and counting which relatives gave more. She had felt so happy then, convinced it would always be like that. But Vladimir had never supported her dreams of having a career or starting her own business. He, and especially his mother, wanted a quiet family life and children. But Nadezhda wasn't ready for that. She wanted more. And now all those hopes and dreams had crashed in an instant. Volodya, the same man who had never once raised his voice at her, was secretly planning to use her inheritance for his own goals and then leave her. The thought felt unreal. Nadezhda just sat there, staring at the wall for several minutes. The detective didn't say a word. He had seen worse reactions. In fact, this was one of the calmer ones. One time, a furious wife smashed a window in a fit of rage at her cheating husband. Back then, it seemed crazy, like the ultimate act of anger and betrayal. But now, as the detective looked into Nadezhda's eyes, he saw something even deeper. Pure hatred and pain that ran through her entire body. Even he was shaken. The man quietly got up and brought her a glass of water. Nadezhda drank it all in one go. Then she remembered what her friend once told her, that Vladimir would sell his own mother for money. At the time, she didn't believe Tatiana. But now it felt true. A plan started forming in her sharp mind. An evil little smile spread across her face. The detective actually stepped back. He had never seen her look like that before. A few months later, a dark blue car drove away from a crooked old fence. Vladimir was behind the wheel. On the other side of that fence, Nadezhda was sitting silently. Galina, the housekeeper, was next to her with a baby stroller. Well, she was more holding on to it than holding a baby. As soon as the car disappeared down the road, Nadezhda stood up. Galina's eyes widened. The woman who had supposedly been paralyzed just stood up from the stroller like nothing had happened. "Galina, let's make a deal," Nadezhda said calmly. "I'll pay you the same amount my husband pays you, but in return, you will not tell him what you just saw." Galina was stunned. She couldn't even speak, just nodded while still clutching the stroller. "Perfect. We're going to be good friends," Nadezhda smiled, handing her some cash. "You'll come here once a month, and I'll give you money. Just keep telling my husband that I'm still in the same condition, and there's no need for him to visit."
Got it.
Galina nodded again, grabbed the money, and walked off without saying a word. Nadezhda went back into the house to change. Inside, everything was dusty. The furniture was covered with cloths, trash was scattered around, and one window was completely broken. Probably some kids had tried to get in. She walked to an old red sofa, pulled the cover off, and sat down, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Then she took out a phone from her pocket, one that, somehow, Nina Ignatievna hadn't found, and called the only person she trusted.
Come.
"Everything happened exactly how you said it would." "Yes, the house in the village. I'll be waiting." She tossed the phone aside and lay down. Her mind was racing with thoughts, but at the same time, it felt empty. About an hour and a half later, after Nadezhda had cleaned the house, changed her clothes, and even made some food, the door opened. In walked a tall woman in a formal blue suit, Tatiana. She carried a small bag with wine and takeout. "I'm not in the mood for greasy eggs," she joked, nodding toward an old frying pan so covered in grime it looked like it hadn't been washed in years. "I'm just glad you brought wine," Nadezhda said. "Without it, I wouldn't have survived this day." Tatiana looked around the rundown house, lost in thought. Her eyes landed on a pack of diapers, and she shook her head. You stayed here pretending to be paralyzed for 3 weeks? That's seriously gross. I know, Nadezhda sighed. But you know what bothered me more? She asked, while pulling plates out of the cabinet. Tatiana was wiping the table and unpacking food. Nina Ignatievna changed my diaper only once a day. She didn't even notice that I was only going to the bathroom once. She was so busy with her romance novels, she didn't even realize I was walking around the house. Tatiana burst out laughing. If you had left the house for a couple of days, she probably wouldn't have noticed either. Just leave one of her photo albums nearby, and she'd think everything was fine. Nadezhda sat down at the table and sighed again. I still can't believe they were just going to let me die. They believed that fake diagnosis so quickly. Instead of questioning it, they got excited. Like they were actually happy about it. They should have asked more questions, Tatiana agreed. But they didn't. The two women started eating, quietly thinking about what would come next. I'll stay here for a month or two, Nadezhda said finally, until I figure out what to do. For the first time in my life, I have 0 plans. And what are you going to do here? Tatiana asked, looking around. An old abandoned house, an overgrown garden, middle of nowhere. You? In a place like this? It doesn't add up. If I jump headfirst into the pool right now, you'd definitely go broke. Not even joking, Nadezhda said. You see, I gave up on my dream of having my own business a long time ago. All my ideas are just collecting dust somewhere back in the apartment. And honestly, they probably don't even matter anymore. I'll stay here. We're divorced now. Maybe I'll come up with something. I haven't had a proper break in ages. Tatiana shrugged. For once, she didn't know what to say. She had never liked Vladimir, not that she could explain why. She had even made a mistake by refusing to be a witness at their wedding. But still, she hadn't thought he was capable of something so cruel. Sure, she once joked that Vladimir would sell his own mother for money, but now it didn't feel like a joke. He always seemed weak and spineless, the type who only knew how to file for insurance. But this, leaving his own wife to die, that was something else. Unbelievable. Tatiana spent that night at the house with her friend and left the next morning. Nadezhda quit her job. She didn't have any big inheritance either. Just the old house. She started the new day with a cold shower. Thankfully, the house still had running water and gas. Her parents had installed everything years ago for her grandmother, though she hadn't lived long enough to enjoy it. The cold water helped clear her head. The last 3 weeks had been a nightmare. She had tested her husband, hoping to see even a hint of care or love. But all she got was coldness, even hatred. It was like he was just waiting for her to die. That pain stayed with her, and it made it hard to just go back to normal. That life was over now. She needed to move on. She had hidden a suitcase of money no one saw. She grabbed it and decided to go to the store. She didn't remember exactly where it was, so she asked a few locals. It was early morning, so people were out heading to work or tending their gardens. The autumn air was crisp and cool, and Nadezhda wrapped herself tighter in an old coat she found in the closet. She finally found the store. It looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. The same colorful sign, the same cloudy window, the same shelves inside. Even the saleswoman, Valentina, was still there in her blue apron. As she stepped inside, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Aunt Valia, hi. Do you remember me? Nadezhda asked. The woman squinted. You look familiar, but I can't quite place you. I'm Margarita Berlakova's granddaughter. I used to visit when I was little. Oh, Nadia, the woman cried. Now I remember. She rushed out from behind the counter, hugged her, and kissed her on the cheek. You haven't been here in so long. Nothing's changed here, as you can see. Can I buy some groceries? Nadezhda asked, looking at the shelves. There was plenty of food, though the place felt small. The prices were surprisingly high, even more expensive than in the city. Valentina just shrugged. I'll take black bread, white bread, a bottle of milk, butter, vegetable oil, pasta, buckwheat, rice, peas, cheese, sugar, and salt. Oh, Nadia, Valentina said. For milk, you should go to Petrovna. She lives just next door to you. This milk, she pointed to the bottle. isn't even good enough for cats. It lasts 6 months. Can you believe that? Milk should never last that long. For fresh vegetables, potatoes, onions, carrots, beets, go see Dmitry Vasilyevic. He's just a short walk from here and sells everything fresh and cheap. Almost everyone here grows their own. Valentina paused. A bell rang, and a man burst into the store. His clothes were dirty, and his face was serious. He pushed past Nadezhda and barked, "Valentina, give me 2 bottles of mineral water. Also, someone should have left a box of meds and pest control stuff here. Winter's coming. We gotta treat the plants soon." "Nikolai," Valentina snapped. "Can't you see I have a customer?" Nikolai glanced at Nadezhda and waved dismissively. "She's a city girl. She can shop in the city. I need this now." Nikolai gave a serious look to Valentina. Nadezhda raised her hand and said calmly, "It's okay, Aunt Valia. Let him go first. Looks like he needs it more than I do." Valentina didn't look happy, but she went to get the box. "Couldn't he wait just a few minutes?" she muttered. The man was tall, with dark hair and strong working hands. He looked serious. Even though he was a bit messy, Nadezhda thought he looked good. He was probably in his 30s, maybe almost 40. He squinted at Nadezhda and asked rudely, "And what about you?" "I'm not in a hurry," she said with a small smile, "but even in the city, people wait their turn, and they're in way more of a rush than you." She turned away, feeling his eyes still watching her. Valentina came back with a heavy box and handed it to him. "Take the mineral water." "It's over there," she said, nodding to a corner where the bottles were stacked. "You can pay me later." Nikolai just nodded, grabbed 2 bottles, and left without saying goodbye. "Who is that?" Nadezhda asked. Valentina waved her hand and went to the cereal shelf. "He's a local farmer. About 8 years ago, he got a small house and maybe some cows from his dad. Started his own farm. Built it all himself, even hired workers. Now he grows big vegetable gardens and sells food to our store and nearby villages. He's a good man, just a little rough around the edges. Nobody really knows why he's like that." Nadezhda bought several bags of groceries and carried them home. They were heavy, and she could barely make it, but at least her small fridge didn't look empty anymore. Then she went to buy vegetables and milk from the people Valentina told her about. In the city, she always bought everything at the store, but here in the village, it was cheaper and the food was better when bought from locals. Dmitry Vasilyevic lived close to the store. He had a big garden and 2 goats that started bleeding when they saw her. As a kid, Nadezhda was scared of animals, so she walked carefully around them. Inside the house, the old man was fixing a chair. Nadezhda explained who she was and why she came. "I'm Dinka. Nice to meet you," he said, smiling through his thick gray beard. "We haven't had any young folks here in ages. You're the first in years. And you're Rita's granddaughter, right?" "I remember her daughter Natasha." "Yes, that's my mom," Nadezhda nodded. "Well, if you buy some vegetables, I can throw in some apples too," he offered. "They're ripe and juicy. Good for winter. You can make jam or compote." Nadezhda smiled happily. But her smile quickly faded when she had to carry 3 huge bags back home. They were twice as heavy as the first ones. Turns out, Dmitry Vasilyevic sold her enough food for a month and a half. Apparently, he had decided that the girl would live off just potatoes and beets. Nadezhda felt awkward saying no, so she sacrificed her back instead, which clearly wasn't strong enough for this much weight. After only a few steps, she stopped, set the bags down, and sighed heavily. A black car with a big trunk stopped nearby. "Need help?" a familiar voice asked. Nadezhda looked up and saw Nikolai looking at her bags. She remembered how rude he had been at the store and started to hesitate. She didn't really want help from a man who didn't know how to be polite. But she didn't want to carry those heavy bags either. So once again, she swallowed her pride. "It wouldn't hurt," she muttered. Nikolai got out of the car and picked up the bags. "You've stocked up, huh? Planning to spend the winter here?" he asked. "No," she said with a grin. "Just planning to cook some compote and fry a few potatoes." She picked up a smaller bag and helped carry it to the car. but Nikolai turned and gently took it from her hands. Nadezhda felt the warmth of his touch and froze for a moment. Then she let go and stepped back. He placed the bag in the trunk and shut it. "Show me where to take you." "Of course," Nadezhda said, and got into the passenger seat. "So, you're from the city?" Nikolai asked as he started the car. "Yeah," she answered thoughtfully. "What brought you here?" "I grew up here," she said with a shrug. "Things got complicated back home. I needed a quiet place to think. I remembered this little house. I've always loved this village. It's peaceful and calm. Nothing gets in the way of your thoughts." "Yeah, that's true," Nikolai nodded. He drove fast. Maybe he was just in a hurry, or maybe that was just his way. Even at the store, he hadn't wasted any time. Nadezhda decided that being quick and direct was just part of who he was. When they got there, Nikolai even helped carry the bags into the house. He walked through tall grass that reached his waist. It was already drying out and rustled loudly with every step. "There's no one to take care of this," Nadezhda said. "Grandma did everything herself, right until the end. She could do it all, sew, fix things, even patch the roof. But I'm a city girl. In this village, women even cut the grass. But I don't even know how to use an electric trimmer. Guess equality hasn't made it here yet," she laughed. "You're from a city, huh?" he smiled. "Yes," she replied as he glanced at his watch. "Time's up. I've got to go," he said. "What's your name?" "Nadezhda," she told him. "Beautiful name." "Nice to meet you, Nadezhda," he smiled. "I'm Nikolai." He got in the car and drove off, leaving her standing there alone. She watched the car disappear, wondering what this new connection might turn into. The next morning started with a strange noise, a mix of rustling and a loud metallic swish. Still half asleep, Nadezhda rolled over, got up from the creaky bed, and looked out the window. There, in the middle of the tall grass, stood Nikolai, swinging an old scythe. The grass fell in neat rows with each strong move. Even though the morning was cool, he was clearly sweating from the work. Nadezhda opened the window and called out to him. He stopped mowing, took a deep breath, and looked up at the open window, where she stood watching him. All she had on was a long linen dress she'd found in her grandmother's closet. She'd cleaned the house and cooked all day yesterday, so she hadn't had time to sort through her clothes. The dress had become her makeshift nightgown. "What are you doing?" Nadezhda asked. Nikolai raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Isn't it obvious?" Without saying a word. "I mean, I can see you're mowing. But why are you doing it in my yard?" "Do you want me to stop?" he asked with a slightly sarcastic look. Nadezhda just shook her head and closed the window, not wanting to continue the conversation. She also noticed the way he looked at her. It was clear he was staring. To avoid that happening again, she quickly changed clothes and went into the small kitchen. She decided to cook pancakes. It was way earlier than she was used to being awake, and she never really cooked breakfast. In the city, she usually skipped it because of her busy life. But she figured she had to feed this unexpected helper who just showed up and started working in her yard. By the time Nikolai finished, she could tell because the sound of the scythe stopped. The pancakes were ready. She was just finishing the last one when she stepped out onto the porch. "Come in for breakfast," she called. Nikolai shrugged, put the scythe aside, and came into the house. He was sweaty and clearly tired. "You can use the shower," Nadezhda said, nodding toward the bathroom. After cleaning up, Nikolai sat down in the kitchen. In front of him was a plate of pancakes and a bowl of sour cream. Nadezhda stood nearby with her arms crossed. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Nikolai raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, you didn't do all that for free," she said. "For the food," he smiled, taking a bite of the pancake. Then he leaned back in the chair and looked straight at her, like he was trying to read her thoughts. "Well," Nadezhda said, "if you don't want money, I won't push. I'm just used to paying for work. In the city, no one helps without expecting something in return." Nikolai laughed softly. "You're the one who said you're from the city. Aunt Valia told me you've been living here for 8 years, so don't blame me for thinking city people get surprised when someone helps without asking anything." "I'm not blaming you," she smiled. "Just explaining." "Why aren't you eating?" he asked. I don't eat breakfast, Nadezhda said, waving it off. I always left early for work and got used to grabbing a snack later. What did you do for work? Nikolai asked, lowering his head a bit with curiosity. I was the assistant to the general director of a company. Nikolai let out a whistle. And now you're here? He motioned toward her small house with the peeling wallpaper. Don't think I was swimming in money, she said with a chuckle. Maybe with a child's shovel, not a real one. But I love my job. I studied business management. It was my dream. Then she paused and smiled sadly. And then, I had a stroke. She laughed softly. But I'll tell you that story another time. I need to clean the house and the attic today. And my friend is coming over in the evening. Busy life, you know? Nikolai smiled. Well, I'd better go too. He finished his breakfast and left. Nadezhda stood at the door, watching him drive away, trying to understand who this man really was. That evening, her friend Tatiana arrived with some things Nadezhda had asked for. When she saw the neatly mown yard, she whistled in surprise. She put the bags down and called out to Nadezhda, who was busy scrubbing the dusty windows. You need to replace this glass, Tatiana said. Where do you think you'll find someone to fix it? Without saying hello, she grinned. Why not ask the guy who mowed your whole yard? That was Nikolai, Nadezhda replied. A local farmer. He gave me a ride yesterday, but I doubt he has time to fix windows. I already found the grass, Nadezhda said, feeling tired. She looked at Tatiana. What kind of farmer is he anyway? Nadezhda stopped cleaning the glass and invited her friend inside. If it's not too much trouble, can you peel the potatoes? They're under the sink. I'm so tired, I can't do anything else. She dropped onto a chair and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Tatiana took off her jacket, grabbed a knife, and started peeling. So, tell me about this farmer. I didn't know him before. He moved here 8 years ago. My grandma passed away around that time, Nadezhda said. He has a farm, animals, and a bunch of vegetable gardens. That's all I know. Is he rich? Tatiana asked with a teasing tone. Why does that matter? Come on, it matters these days. And as a man, what do you think of him? I don't even know, Nadezhda admitted. He's confusing. First, he was rude to me at the store. Then, he gave me a ride home. Then he showed up in the morning to mow my yard, without asking, and didn't even take money for it. Maybe he likes you, Tatiana smirked. Oh, stop, Nadezhda rolled her eyes. He probably thinks I'm just some clueless city girl. Still, take a better look at him. Maybe, just maybe, this time you'll find a real man, one who knows how to act like one. Nadezhda didn't reply, but she didn't argue either. So, how's work? Don't ask, Tatiana groaned. It's a mess without you. Our manager's gone nuts. He's already gone through 3 new assistants. Turns out, you were doing more than we all realized. Nadezhda had now lived in the village for a month. She got used to the small house and the quiet life. At first, it drove her crazy. She had worked her whole life, grew up in a poor family, started working right after school, never took time off unless she had to, and was always on time. Now, she had barely done anything in a whole month. During the first week, she cleaned the house from top to bottom. But then things slowed down. She started waking up late, reading books Tatiana brought, visiting elderly neighbors and listening to their stories. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about Nikolai. It seemed like she saw him every day since he helped her that first time. He even heard her talk about broken glass and showed up the next morning to fix it. She made him pancakes. Then, he fixed her gate. She made him breakfast again. This little routine became normal. Nadezhda no longer got surprised by the early morning noise outside or by finding him in her yard. He would walk into the house and sit at the table. They didn't have deep talks. He didn't bring flowers or give compliments. He just showed up. And that in itself felt strange. Nadezhda wanted to understand him. Admit it, Nikolai. You only come here for the food, she joked one morning. It's not me who said that, he smirked, rinsing his hands under the tap. Their talks were usually like that, short, funny, and with very little information. But in the village, people talked. One day, A girl from a nearby farm even came to Nadezhda's house looking angry. "Nikolai's mine," she said with a threatening tone. "You think you can just come here from the city and steal our men? Think again." She ripped a leaf from a tree and threw it at Nadezhda, who stood shocked on the porch. Later, when Nikolai visited, Nadezhda told him about the strange visitor. "Were you scared?" he asked with a grin, but something serious hid behind the smile. "I've been threatened by big corporate men in the city," Nadezhda said calmly. "A few angry village girls don't scare me. Instead of my boss, I had to deal with it myself," Nadezhda said. "I once refused to sign a contract with a company, and 5 grown men in suits almost beat me up. I was alone. That was scary." She gave a small laugh. "So no, I'm not scared of a leaf thrown by some jealous girl who likes a man that, for some unknown reason, keeps fixing everything in my house." Nikolai smiled and stayed quiet. "You don't talk much, huh?" she asked. He nodded. "Maybe we can talk more casually now? We're not that different in age," she suggested. Nikolai nodded again and returned to eating his borscht. Nadezhda smiled. It was the first time she had met a man who didn't want to talk too much. One day, Nadezhda went for a walk around the village. Nikolai hadn't visited in a while. She figured maybe he had lost interest in her. But deep down, she hoped to run into him. For some reason, she really wanted to see him again. She had grown used to his quiet presence, and now, she missed it. But all she saw were men running around and talking to each other. She spotted Valentina coming out of the store, looking worried. "Aunt Valia, what's going on?" Nadezhda asked. Valentina sighed and put a hand on her forehead. "Nikolai's farm, something's wrong. It's falling apart. People are upset. Our men and women might lose their jobs. Where else can they work in this village? Oh, what a mess." She shook her head. Nikolai always struggled to keep the farm going. But now it looks like everything's gone completely wrong. Nadezhda looked out toward the road. "Can you tell me how to get to his farm?" she asked. Valentina gave her directions. Nikolai's farm was at the far edge of the village, a big, long building where you could hear cows mooing. Women in aprons were walking around with buckets. Men were busy in the back. There were large gardens too, but now in mid-autumn, they were empty. Nadezhda asked one of the women where Nikolai's office was. She found it, a tiny room with a desk and chair in the middle, a cupboard in the corner, and a small window where a little sunlight came in. Nikolai stood hunched over some papers, muttering, using a calculator and scribbling changes on the documents. Nadezhda stepped closer. "Hello, Nikolai." He turned around quickly and sighed. "What broke this time?" he asked. "Sorry," she said. "This isn't about the house. I heard you're having problems. I came to help." "Everything's fine. I can handle it," he replied, a bit sharply. But Nadezhda walked right up to the table and gently pushed him aside to look at the papers. He let out a long breath. "Leave," he said, "or I'll have to carry you out myself." Nadezhda didn't budge. She glanced at the papers and right away saw huge numbers and crazy expenses. For a farm this size, it was way too much. "Do you even have an accountant?" she asked. "Or a finance expert?" "I said I can handle it," Nikolai repeated. "Yeah? I can see how well you're handling it," she replied, raising an eyebrow. "You're wasting money and you don't even know where it's going. You need help. Right now." "And where am I supposed to find a specialist?" he said, sounding hopeless. Nadezhda smiled wide and pointed to herself. "I'm an economist," she said, "and I'm here now. I worked for years at a company where both the income and expenses were much bigger than yours," Nadezhda said. Nikolai sighed, waved his hand, and sat down tiredly in the chair, giving up on the papers. That night, when it was already dark outside, Nikolai and Nadezhda finally left his office. The farm was quiet. All the workers had cleaned up and gone home. "Are you sure," he asked, "that if we cut these expenses, things won't get worse? Why do you need those big cooling units and milk deliveries 3 times a day?" Nadezhda replied, "1 delivery is enough. The rest of the time, the milk can be stored in the fridge. There's no point wasting money on driving back and forth." She flipped through the paperwork. "Same with other expenses. These cost estimates are a mess." Nikolai scratched his head. Honestly, I was a military guy. I never had anything to do with budgets or accounting. My dad always dreamed of having his own farm with big fields, and I tried to make that dream come true, even if I started late. Is he gone? Nadezhda asked softly. No, Nikolai said. Thank God. But he got very sick. I had to send him to a special care facility. I couldn't take care of him on my own. That's when I had to take over the farm and bring it back to life. Nadezhda looked at him with sympathy. They were walking slowly along a narrow path. The cool wind blew gently around them. It felt peaceful, calm and quiet just right. Then Nikolai asked quietly, And what's the real story behind your stroke? Nadezhda tensed up. At first, she thought about joking, but then she remembered she promised to tell him the truth. She let out a deep breath and began. That's when I came up with the plan. I remembered a talk with the detective. Tanya helped me. She found a doctor who, for a small payment, agreed to say I'd had a stroke and was dying soon. They believed it. So fast. Like they were expecting it. It was awful. I lived with my husband and mother-in-law for 3 more weeks after that, and all my pity for him disappeared. All the love and care gone. I felt useless, forgotten. And when he brought me here, I knew that was the end. Nikolai took her hand and squeezed it tightly. Nadezhda looked down at her hand in his, and then looked up and nodded, quietly thankful for his support. Why don't you go back to the city? He asked. At first, I just needed a break. But then I realized, I don't want to go back, she said. The city is too fast. Everyone's always rushing. And besides, it would just remind me of Volodya and his mother. Nikolai let go of her hand and suddenly picked up the pace. Come on, I want to show you something. They walked for a while. Nadezhda didn't know where they were going. But when they got there, she gasped in surprise. He had brought her to a huge, beautiful house with a tall fence. This belonged to a friend of mine, Nikolai explained. We served together in the military. He recently died of cancer. Now the house is up for sale. I really want to buy it, but I don't have the money. They want to tear it down and build a sawmill here, or something else. But if I buy this house, that's it, no turning back. I don't want to go back to the city. I'm too fast for the village, and too slow for the city. It's strange, I know, but it's true. Here, I feel like I can do something. In the city, I have no hope. Nadezhda looked at his serious face. His eyes stared at the house with hope. His lips were tight. There were wrinkles on his forehead, the kind that appeared when he was deep in thought. But in his eyes, she saw something else. Determination. She reached out and squeezed his hand, just like he had done earlier. You will make it, she said with a smile. I'll help you. We'll fix the farm together. And you'll finally have what your father always dreamed of. I promise. Nikolai didn't say anything, but the light of hope in his eyes said everything. And they started working together. Nadezhda helped Nikolai restore the farm. They improved working conditions. They bought new cattle and better equipment. The farm finally started making real money, not just on paper. Nikolai was very happy about it. He gave Hope flowers a few times to say thank you. He also started coming back to her house to fix little things again. Almost every morning, he came by and she cooked breakfast. It became their little routine. A few weeks after one of their walks, Tatiana visited Hope and brought her a folder of documents. Are you sure? She asked, even though she knew the answer. Hope nodded.
Yes.
There's no going back now. Tatiana just sighed.
She didn't want to argue.
After everything Hope had been through, she tried to support her no matter what. Hope held the documents close to her chest and headed to the farm. New equipment was supposed to arrive that day, so she was in a hurry. Plus, she had good news to share. She found Nikolai in his office as usual. He was writing something at his desk. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile. You're early, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Hope sat down and placed the folder on the table. Read this. Nikolai slowly went through the papers. With every page, his eyes grew wider. Hope watched him closely, her heart beating fast. Finally, he closed the folder, set it down, and looked at her. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low. "Did you buy it?" Hope nodded, then stood up. She looked straight into his eyes. "You didn't want them to tear it down. It was your friend's house. I promised you'd succeed. So I bought it." Nikolai sighed. "That's a lot of money." "It's my money," Hope said calmly. "I can do what I want with it. And I want this. I like the village. I like this." She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she kissed him. "Is that how you convinced me?" Nikolai asked with a small smile when she pulled away.
Hope laughed.
"Is that what you think of me?" "No," he whispered. "You bought that house for us?" "Yes," Hope said softly. "If you want us to be something. I think I've fallen in love." He kissed her again and held her close. Finally, it felt real. Meanwhile, far away in the city, Vladimir sat across from his wife, shocked by what he had just heard. His hands were on his knees. His eyes stared ahead, not really seeing anything. "So you're saying you made all this up to test me?" he asked. Hope looked at him calmly and sipped her tea. Then, someone knocked at the door. Tatiana walked in wearing a tight blue dress. She looked at Vladimir and smirked. "Why'd you tell him everything?" she said to Hope. "Too bad I didn't get to see his face when he heard it." "You knew?" Vladimir asked, now angry. Tatiana laughed. "Of course I knew. It was my doctor who gave her the fake diagnosis. Did you really think Nadia pulled this off alone? She loved you too much to do anything harsh. But you broke her heart." "You don't know anything," Vladimir muttered. "Nadia, I love you." Hope raised her eyebrows and smiled coldly. "What about Lily? She didn't work out? Or were you just waiting to start your business and spoil her with gifts?" Vladimir tried to reply, but nothing came out. He realized there was no excuse. "And how could you play such a trick on us with my mom?" he asked. "She was heartbroken when she thought you were sick." Hope and Tatiana looked at each other and burst out laughing. "She wasn't heartbroken," Hope said. "She was thrilled. She ran around telling everyone I was sick and would soon die. She wanted my inheritance more than you did." Vladimir looked at them both, stunned. Then his eyes wandered to the house outside, and suddenly he smiled. "You bought all of this during our marriage," Vladimir said, narrowing his eyes. Tatiana frowned. She immediately understood what he was trying to say. She was about to argue, but Vladimir continued. "Since you got it all while we were still married, that means half of it is mine, right?" Tatiana was a lawyer. She knew the law and how these kinds of situations usually turned out. Nadezhda stood up, ready to tell her husband exactly what she thought of him. But before she could say anything, the door suddenly opened. The same man who had cut Vladimir off on the road walked in. "Hi, Kolya," Tatiana said calmly, then leaned in and whispered something in the man's ear. Kolya turned to Vladimir with a serious, angry face. He looked like someone you didn't want to mess with. He walked toward Vladimir fast and with purpose. Vladimir started to panic and backed away. Kolya growled, "If you ever think about threatening Nadia again, I'll make your life very difficult." He grabbed Vladimir by the collar, dragged him toward the door, and threw him out. They heard the front door slam. Vladimir had left in a hurry. "Why did you let him in?" Nikolai asked, coming closer to Nadezhda and hugging her from behind. She had stood strong while her husband was there, not wanting to show weakness. But everyone in the room could see how hard it was for her. The betrayal had really hurt. "I needed to tell him everything," she whispered. "I needed to see his face when he realized he wasn't getting a single thing from me." "Did that help?" Tatiana asked gently. Nadezhda nodded and leaned deeper into Nikolai's strong arms. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." But Vladimir wasn't done. Despite Nikolai's warning, he filed for divorce too and demanded to split the property. Legally, he had a small case. He couldn't claim her inheritance, but the house she bought and the land she rented during the marriage counted as shared property. One day, a court notice arrived in the mail. Nikolai brought the envelope to her with the rest of the mail. His face was serious as he handed it over. Nadezhda opened the letter, read the court summons, and went pale. She sat down on the couch, exhausted. She was still in dirty clothes from working the fields, but she didn't care. She hadn't truly believed Vladimir would take her to court. Then again, she never thought he'd leave her to die either. He turned out to be someone she never really knew. "We need a good lawyer," Nikolai said, holding the papers. "Tanya can help," Nadezhda replied. "She's head of the legal department at her firm. She has a license to handle this. And she already knows everything. We won't have to explain a thing." Nikolai sat down next to her. "Listen," he said gently. "I went into the bathroom yesterday after you, and I found something." Nadezhda looked at him, worried. "What?" "I found a test," he said. "You're pregnant." Nadezhda nodded slowly. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you wouldn't want it." Nikolai didn't say anything. He simply leaned in and kissed her softly. She hugged him tight and smiled with relief. "So you're okay with it?" The joy in his smile and the twinkle in his eyes said everything she needed to hear. No words necessary. Nikolai hugged Nadezhda tightly and pulled her close. "If that scumbag tries to sue you for half of everything, I don't care," he said. "Even if we lose everything, we'll still have our house, our land, our child, and each other. That's enough for me." Nadezhda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. But when she opened them, Nikolai saw something in her gaze, a look that once even made a detective nervous. It was the look of someone who had made up her mind and wasn't backing down. "He's going to court to take what belongs to me by blood," she said coldly. "But he'll leave with nothing. Not only will I keep what's mine, I'll take everything he has. He'll walk away with nothing." The court case happened quickly, almost like the universe itself wanted this strange story to end. Tatiana agreed to be Nadezhda's lawyer. Nikolai supported her from the witness stand, just like many people from the village did. The judge was a tall, red-haired woman with a strict look. At first, she seemed bored as Vladimir told a story. She asked him questions that he struggled to answer, which seemed to entertain her a little. On Vladimir's side were neighbors and so-called friends. They had nothing good to say about Nadezhda. But the worst of all was Ignatyevna. She went all in on the drama. "I was terrified when Nadia got sick," she cried. "When she had the stroke, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I waited and waited for news from the hospital." She wiped her tears with a white handkerchief and went on. "When I finally saw Nadia, I nearly had a heart attack myself. She didn't move. She looked like she was dying. I had to care for her while Volodenko worked. I cleaned, fed her, and now we find out she was faking it? We were betrayed. Me and my son." She burst into tears again and sat down sniffling. But something in the judge's face changed. She seemed more interested now, like she was finally paying close attention. Tatiana stood up. "Your Honor, the plaintiff and his witnesses are not telling the truth. Let's begin with this. We have proof of the plaintiff's betrayal." A recording was played in the courtroom. It was a phone call between Vladimir and a woman named Lilia. Their voices filled the room. Then a detective came forward and confirmed everything about the affair. Ignatyevna jumped up, furious, but the judge warned her to sit down, and she did, clearly upset. Tatiana kept going. Also, the defendant never lied to the plaintiff in writing. She only pretended to be sick to see how he'd react. No medical documents were ever shown. The doctor only verbally gave the diagnosis to Vladimir and his mother. And this part, she added, about how Ignatyevna cared for the sick defendant. We also have a recording. She pressed play again. "Yes, Vovachka, feed me," Ignatyevna's voice said casually. "Oh, I got distracted reading, completely forgot. But she'll survive till lunch. She's not going to lose any weight. You found a nurse?
Good.
As long as she doesn't ask for much pay. And what she eats, that's nothing. The doctor said she doesn't have much longer anyway." The audio stopped. The courtroom went silent. Gasps were heard. Tatiana continued calmly. The plaintiff also demanded a share of the following property: the house at 8 Rapina Street in Ilinskaya village, and profits from the Zolotea Birch Farming Company. But here's the truth. All that property was purchased by Nadezhda Viktorovna Vova, the defendant. and it was legally transferred to Nikolai Petrovich Gorlov, her partner, a full week before the lawsuit was filed. So, yes, the property was bought during the marriage, but it was also given away during the marriage, which means Vladimir has no right to ask for any of it.
She paused.
The rest of the money is in the defendant's personal bank account, and the share of the estate in Germany, that's part of her inheritance. Again, the plaintiff has no right to any of it. The judge's lips curled slightly, a faint smile. Nadezhda noticed it, and in that moment, she was sure the judge had looked at Vladimir with something close to satisfaction. To transfer the property to Nikolai, Nadezhda had to work hard. She even found a corrupt notary who backdated the documents. This helped their case a lot. So, does this mean the claim is invalid? The judge asked Tatiana. Yes, Your Honor. Vladimir Lvov's claim is to split the property equally between him and the defendant. But not all the property belongs to them both. Some of it is only his, for example, a 3-room apartment on Pegasova Street, a BMW, and money in a joint account. I object, shouted Vladimir's lawyer, an older man with a round face, bald head, and glasses. The apartment is an inheritance from his father. Tatiana calmly nodded. That's true. But the law says if one spouse significantly improves the other's property, it can become joint property. And what exactly did she improve? The lawyer asked. Tatiana replied, Your Honor, please look at the screen. These are photos of the apartment before and after the renovation. The first photo was taken 1 year after the wedding. The second photo was taken 6 months after that, after the renovations. And how can you prove that the defendant paid for the renovations? The lawyer asked. First of all, Tatiana said, Vladimir didn't work between September and April when the renovation happened. His bank account didn't have enough money. Also, we have a statement from the team leader who did the work. The contract was signed in the defendant's name. The lawyers argued, called in witnesses, and made their cases. Then the judge left to make her decision. She came back holding a big red folder. All rise, the judge's assistant announced. The judge read the verdict. The court decides to partly approve the plaintiff's request. The property will be divided. A third of the apartment will go to Nadezhda, the car will be shared, and 50% of the money in Vladimir's account will go to Nadezhda. The decision is final and cannot be appealed. The judge banged the gavel. The case was closed. Vladimir and his mother, Nina Ignatievna, stared at Nadezhda with anger and hatred. But Nadezhda just hugged Nikolai tightly. Tatiana joined them with a big smile. I told you we'd take everything from him, Nadezhda said, her voice calm but with a strange edge. This is all yours, Nikolai said softly. And yours too, Nadezhda replied. Now we finally have everything we dreamed of. We'll have a baby, a house, and peace, added Tatiana as she packed up the papers. Well, Nadezhda said with a sigh, touching her belly, looks like everything's going to be okay. Tatiana smiled warmly. Godfather, are you ready? She asked Nikolai. Do we have a choice? He joked. Nadezhda smiled and hugged the two people she loved most. Now, finally, everything was going to be okay.